All right, today I'm in Dublin with Dave O'Reilly. Thanks very much for agreeing to take some time out to talk to us, Dave.
Thank you for asking me to talk to you.
That's all right. Right, so if I've got this right, correct me if there's anything more. You're a ground commentator. You spent 34 years in the industry with Ladbrokes and Paddy Power. You work on course with AK Bets, and you're an ethical celebrant.
Correct.
Where should we start?
Well, probably start with the betting career. My betting career, I started with Mecca bookmakers back in 1987. I had left Ireland in 1986 due to I was an economic refugee because there was just no work in Ireland at the time. I had previously worked as a chef and I ended up working in a kebab shop. There was so little work over here. So in the 80s, I went over to the UK, 86, worked in a few bars over there. And then the last job I had as a chef, I was a pastry chef. And I must say, I was never any good at pastry. But I said I was. And when I went in, I was working at this beautiful French restaurant beside White Hart Lane called La Pâtisserie or whatever. So I was the pastry chef. And then I realised after about a month, there's only so much you can do with a sponge cake. So I said, I better get the hell out of here. And I noticed that Mecca bookmakers, who were quite prevalent in London at the time, where I was living, and they were looking for staff. And I said, I like an old betcher. I've been betting since I was about 7. I think I'll give this a whirl. It'll do me till Christmas anyway. So I applied for a job in Mecca bookmakers, went for the interview, did a little maths test. Within 2 weeks, I'd started in Mecca bookmakers. Started off as a cashier. I was working in the shop in Blackstock Road in North London, near Finsbury Park. In the Mecca shop there, it was quite a big shop, and the manager there was very good. He was a Greek fella called Andreas Victoris, who was still a very good friend of mine. He's godfather to my daughter. We meet up with him 2 or 3 times a year when we go racing, either Ascot or Paris is where we go. Definitely meet every year, and Cheltenham. So I started with him in around October 87 as a cashier. And by Christmas, he said to me, I think, Dave, you have the flair here. You should go on the trainee manager program. So I applied for the trainee manager program, went in, sat another maths test. So passed that. So then they sent me on, like the big thing in the then of days was settling. And Mecca, I can quite honestly say, had the best training in the whole world when it came to betting shop staff, because the settling program was a 6 weeks program. And it was ran down in Brick Lane in the brewery, which really suited me because you could always have a pint every lunchtime. So you did your 4-week settling course. You would then go out and become like a second settler for the busier shops. Now, what they call busy compared to Irish shops is not busy at all. You know what I mean? They had very few shops. It was only when I came back to Ireland to work here, the volume. But anyway, that's aside. So did my second settling in shops, went and did my manager's course. That was a 4-week course. And it ran through everything like from, costs, energies, P&Ls, all that. So it was fantastic training. And then in around June of 88, I got my first shop, which was on Gillespie Road, right beside Highbury. And me being a Spurs fan was a bit of a die. I was going, I wish I was up at White Hart Lane, but I was there at Gillespie Road. And I always used to love them because when the Saturdays, when the Arsenal were at home, there was none of the variety of bets there is now. I'd have to ring the traders to get prices for the first Arsenal goal scorer. That was it. There was no betting like double result, nothing to what there is now. First goal scorer, that's all we betted on. And it was great. Merce used to always come over and back himself, and more times than not, he won. So that's how my betting career started with Mecca in the 80s. I spent till 1992 with them. I rose up through the ranks because I don't put it down to my hard work and probably my personality, because I went to shops where no one else would go. And anytime they were saying, will you go and manage this shop? I'd say, well, do I get an upgrade? And they'd say, yeah, I'll go. Because it was just, if you're going to work, you want to earn money. So I worked in some pretty crazy betting shops over there, I must say.
Yeah, that must have been quite unusual. How old were you at the time?
Sorry?
How old were you when you got your first shop?
I was 21 when I got my first shop.
So that's quite young, and you were working in some quite hairy areas.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, I only think of it now. When I was 21, I looked at managers who were, say, in their late 40s, and I'd be looking at them going, they haven't got a clue, you know what I mean? Bleeding helpless. And then I got to that age myself in my career, and I'm going, the young people coming through now must be saying, look at that helpless, he hasn't got a clue. But the experience and the people I worked with were magnificent. That's what I really loved about the business. It was the crack, the camaraderie. You know, you'd meet up after work. There was no nights then at the time. There was no Sundays. So it was a much easier job. It was much more relaxed pace. Sure, I remember, like, I know when I was a manager, it was about the second shop I had. It was the summertime, so you'd go in the morning at 9:30, put the papers up. Your cashier would come in. So you'd go off, play a few holes of golf, couple of pints, back for 1:30, send her off, because the first race wasn't until 2:00. And like in them days, there was 3 horses, 2 dogs. If there was 4 horses, there was 1 dog, and if there was 5 horses, there was no dogs. And we used to complain, oh, it's busy. You know, if you look at the volume of stuff now, so there probably would have been about 60 events to settle a day. So there's probably about 360 events an hour now in a betting shop.
Now, I'm just interested in, well, it's obviously like a community sort of spirit.
Oh, it was pretty, there's still people now I meet who I worked with in 87, 88, 89, and we're still friends. We meet up once a year, you know, we go out, might meet them in London, or they might come over here, and we go on the lash. And as I said, Andreas is my daughter's godfather. He's been to my wedding, her christening, everything, you know.
Now, something that I'm interested in, it's probably just me, but I mean, multiples. So when you read about bookmakers hedging multiples when they're building up, I mean, at what point would you start hedging a multiple? Because they waste a lot of stakes.
Well, look, I'll be honest, in the time I spent with Mecca, that was the only place where, as a manager, I had the facility to hedge bets, right? And it was drilled into us, you know, look at your bet, because you'd go through your bets, you know, after every race, you're on top of everything, so you'd know what was running on. And there's only on 2 occasions where I hedged bets myself from the shop. And they were about, I only had to do 2 £250 doubles, because it was getting near the end of the year. You knew what sort of a bonus you were heading for, so you were just trying to protect it. But we, you know, they trusted us that much, they gave us that facility to do it. I mean, now, sure, I don't think they give any, God, the poor managers in betting shops now have no autonomy to do anything anymore. Like, they can't even pay out a bet, you know, for a few quid if it's, you know, a second late, or without having to ring someone.
Now, can you give us a bit of a background about, you know, obviously you're from where we are now, Dublin, when we were driving here, you showed me where you were born, that sort of thing. Can you give us a bit of a background, maybe from like a racing family?
No, not a racing family at all. My grandfather would have been a punter. You know, he was your, you know, 10p Yankee man. And I remember in the early 70s, he told me the story, well, when I was a bit older, how we clicked for, like, you know, which would have been a sizable bet, probably about 4 or 5 grand. But the limits at the time were only £1,000. So that's all he got. So I remember how I got into it was 74. I always remember the year, because Red Rum won a second national. West Germany won the World Cup. And that's when I was kind of 7.5, so you're getting into it. I backed Red Rum, and unfortunately I got the bug then. So I've been backing horses and dogs ever since. I was so much, my ma used to say, you're a scourge. Because when I was about 9 or 10, I was saying, will you bring me racing? Will you bring me racing? So one day they eventually brought me up to the Phoenix Park on St. Patrick's Day. They brought me up there. It was snowing on St. Patrick's Day, but the great Lester Pickett was there. So then it was even more, he became my absolute hero in racing, and, like, you know, when you look back on his races. But my father never drank, never gambled, you know what I mean? So I'm the only one in the family, well, they all drink, but I'm the only one who gambles, and just has a love for, like, I'd go horse racing 7 days a week. Now I'm lucky that my wife, she's kind of like me, she loves sporting events. You know, we love live sport, whether it's racing, football, rugby, GAA, you know, basketball, anything, we just go to it.
So when you say they took you to Phoenix Park, was that out of their comfort zone? Would that have been just for you?
Well, look, I mean, Ma would have been a snob. She'd remind you of Hyacinth Bouquet, you know what I mean? Like, she always thought she was someone else. So she would have liked going to the races. You know, even so much that when I got to say 13 or 14, I used to, because I'd be punting in betting shops then, right, doing, you know, 20p Yankees and all this kind of stuff, right? You know, because you went in, there was no hassle, right? So if I won a few quid, I'd bring them to the races. So I used to, every now and again, especially the Punchestown Festival, that's what I love about Punchestown, I used to bring them to Punchestown. So I'd pay for them. I was only about 13, 14. I'm paying for them to get in, and I'm paying for their day out from what I've got off a bet.
So when you were punting back in those days, when you were only a kid, so did you take it seriously? Were you like looking at form and stuff?
No, gee, look, a bit of the form, sure. I mean, like, you know, I still don't really go on form. I'd just ask someone what to back. In those days, I would have picked the horses out of the morning paper. And, you know, if I seen a few ones or a jockey I liked or whatever, something like, you know, stuff like that.
So when you were working in the shops when you were a manager, were you punting them?
Oh yeah, sure, it was great. It was like, it was like I had landed in, Narnia. I'm in heaven. I mean, I've got a job where I can have a bet, watch the racing. Yeah, and it's so funny, we often talk about it when we were settling. You'd be, as the years went on, you'd be watching a race at Folkestone. It might be a selling handicap and you'd say, Jesus, such and such won that last year. Because you would have had it in a bet, because it's all in your memory from settling. Now you don't, like, I couldn't tell you what won any race yesterday even. And I was working for someone last night, in a shop doing stuff, and I couldn't tell you what won any of the races.
No, you're talking about settling. Now, for the young people that have got an app that just put in, if they've had a 3 out of 4, they're lucky 15, they just tap it in, it comes out. How did you used to have to settle?
Well, we were trained, it was a 6-week settling course.
Yeah, you said, yeah, so what was it like, field book and all that,
No, settling, you marked your marker sheet and you went through your slips. And, if you had a winner, you marked it up, and you'd know the ones that were running on, you take them out because you'd keep an eye on them. And if you knew there came a stage where you might have to let head office know, or in the 2 occasions where I hedged, just to protect my bonus. But you were always on top of everything. Like, unfortunately now, some of the shops that are out there, someone would take a bet at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the person inputting it into the machine mightn't do it till 6 o'clock that night. So the bet could be all up and won, so you don't know what's going on. Whereas, like, as settlers, we were always told, be on top of everything.
But I mean, mathematically, to settle like equally divided round robin or something like that, I mean, did you know how to do that by hand?
Oh yeah, we had to, because the settling course was broken down into 2 parts. The first exam was a 2-hour exam where you were given 200 bets, a marker sheet that was marked up, and it would have had all different, dead heats, rule 4s, 2 in the same race, and you had to do them all by pen and paper. You didn't even have a calculator. And then the second test we did was where the check-a-bet was the machine of choice then. The check-a-bet and the OTT machines were just coming out too. They were the kind of ones with the screen on them. But my favourite one was always a check-a-bet because it was quicker. And so the second exam was 3 hours where you're sitting in an environment where they're playing commentary, you're writing down your results, and you've got a pack of bets that you got to go through and settle and submit them all at the end of the day.
And was there ever such a thing as a punter that would beat you?
Look, there's always a few, but in the long run, very few of them beat you in the long run. But there would have been, like, when I was especially a trainee manager, I would have went to one shop that was actually tax-free. It was up near Seven Sisters, and they'd let the punters in. They'd lay them a bet. They'd lay them a decent bet, but that was their marker because they'd opened an hour earlier. It was tax-free, so you got some good shunters in there. But that was like, they nearly based their books off them in those days. So
would you be following those sort of guys in?
Unfortunately, no, because I was
no WhatsApp groups in those days.
No, there was nothing. She couldn't even. I couldn't ring home because my parents didn't have a phone back here.
So you never had to. Do you ever had to deal with any sort of sticking on gangs coming in or?
Look, slow counting's been going on since time began. I was in a few robberies, a few hairy moments in some certain shops where they'd be threatening you. If you don't pay me, I'm going to kill you, and you'd kind of use your Irish kind of, come on lads, I'm only doing a job here. Or you couldn't give in to them, because if you give in to them, you've lost the shop. I mean, I had one shop where the police, there was a drugs raid one day, and it was so funny. I knew the drugs raid was coming because I was asked did I want to leave. I said, no, I'm not going, because, they'll know I knew what was happening. So I'm working in the shop, and we didn't know when it was going to happen. So next of all, there's a race going off, it was a 2-mile chase or whatever. That's going off. So we used to have, the off slips. You'd put the off slip through. That signified any bet after that off slip was void, win or lose. So the cashier is about to put the off slip in. I see a crowd of fellas burst through the door. And I said, oh no, hang on, I think there's people coming up to do a bet. It wasn't, it was the drug squad coming in to flash their badges and bring the dogs in and sniff everything out and all, So that was like hairy times. Robberies were I was in a few, but none of them were too bad,